Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to What is America to You. I'm your host, Derek Dempsey. I'm coming at you from New York. I'm going to say we, I mean me and the lovely Jessica.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. Okay, so before we start, as usual, thank you for the comments. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the thumbs down. I think we got 1 or 2. And some of the comments are great. Also, give us some subscriptions. Subscribe. Tell everybody to subscribe. We need that on What is America to You. Okay, our next guest is the co-founding member of one of the world's most influential rock bands. They've influenced everybody all the way through up to Guns N' Roses, Metallica, Def Leppard, everybody in the rock business and beyond. And they're still influencing modern music. His band's famous album, Live and Dangerous, the live album, sold in excess of 500,000 copies back in the late 70s and knocked Saturday Night Fever off the charts. So that was a big blow for the disco people.
Wow, that's cool.
Right?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And that was a great album. I love the Saturday Night Live album. Anyway, he's considered as one of the greatest drummers in history. Not just rock drummers, but drummers. He's an incredible drummer. Underrated, I feel. He's also co-written classics from the band like the cowboy song Sha-La-La, The Rocker, and Are You Ready? He's currently playing in his own band, who were a tribute to his groundbreaking band that he helped form in the 70s with Phil Lynott. Everybody knows who this is now. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce to you the legendary Brian Downey of Thin Lizzy. Good morning, Brian Downey. Welcome to What is America to You. How you doing, Brian?
How's it going, Derek? What time is it there? It must be 7 o'clock in the morning or something, is it?
It is, yeah.
Very early. Sorry for getting up so early.
Look, no worries, Brian. It's great. It's just great to interview you. And I want to just introduce you to Jessica here, my partner.
Hi, Brian. How you doing?
What's your name?
Jessica.
Jessica, hi, Mom.
She's from Canada and a huge rock fan, so, you know.
Too much.
Brilliant. So listen, we'll just... I just wanted to get a couple of things before we start, so then we can record and go away. I was going to ask you a little bit about the early bands like the Liffey Beats. And am I right in saying the Modcon and the Cave Dwellers?
Oh, the Modcon Cave Dwellers. Well, that's just one band.
Oh, is it? I'm sorry. I thought it was... Okay, gotcha. That's a fucking great name.
Modcon Cave Dwellers, yeah. Oh, no, that was a band I started with a guy called Robbie Welch back in Crumlin, back in the early middle 60s, actually.
Great.
We started a band called Modcon Cave Dwellers. We were called the Liffey Beats first, and the Liffey Beats didn't sound too hip, you know, so we decided to call it something a bit more in keeping with the mod situation that was seemed to be starting off in Ireland around that time.
Brilliant.
Came from London, in fact, but we picked up on it, and the Liffey Beats didn't seem to sound too good, so we decided to change the name from the Liffey Beats to the Modcon Cave Dwellers, you know. And so we had Robbie Welch in there, Bomber Fagan on guitar, and Bomber Fagan was a neighbour of mine in Crumlin, you know. So, and I can't remember Tom Cullen was the lead guitar. He was from around the corner. So there was lots of bands happening around that time, you know, back in Crumlin, you know, but back in the middle 1960s, because of the Beatles, obviously, the massive influence, and you know, all the guys in around the area picked up on it, you know, obviously, and you know, decided to buy guitars and drums and whatever, and become singers and guitar players and drummers. So I mean, there was plenty of opportunities back then, you know, to start a sort of a beat group, they were called back then, you know. And I took the opportunity, and when I heard Robbie was looking for a drummer, I approached him one day and I said, you know, he says, yeah, I heard you playing, I heard you practicing in your front room, which you did, you know. And he said, it's great you approached me because we are looking for a drummer. So I got into the band fairly quickly, you know. We just rehearsed in his house, did all the Beatles, all the Stones, and all the hits of the day, you know, the Searchers, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, all that sort of stuff. But it was mainly from the Beatles. Everybody was really influenced by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, I suppose, and to a lesser extent, I suppose. But the Beatles were the Kickstarters for that sort of stuff. You know, I know Elvis was around before that, and Cliff Richard and the Shadows. You know, and I used to listen to those bands as well. Not so much Elvis, but definitely Cliff Richard and the Shadows, and you know, and there was other bands around like Billy Fury's band and a few other bands. But when the Beatles came out, that seemed to really kickstart the trend in guitars and drums, and everybody seemed to be buying guitars back then, you know.
Yeah.
So that's how that started, you know, that Modcon Cave Dwellers. Phil actually asked Robbie Welch one. I didn't know Phil at this stage. Asked Robbie Welch. Actually asked me indirectly. Robbie Welch asked me to go up and ask Phil, was it okay to support him on a show? Phil was playing in the Black Eagles at this stage, and they were playing in a place called St. Paul's in Mount Argus. And Robbie said, you know, ask Phil, would he allow us to play, you know, interval for 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. So I asked Phil in school. I didn't really know Phil that well, I you know, but he stood out like a sore thumb. He was the only black guy in the whole school. So I approached Phil one day, and I said, look, we've got a band, you know, and we'd love to support the Black Eagles. And he goes, yeah, I know your face. Don't you play drums? And I said, wow, how do you know that? He said, somebody pointed you out to me in school a couple of months ago and said, you play in the band with Robbie Welch. And I said, that's brilliant. So he kind of knew who I was. When I asked him, he says, look, I'll have to sort of check it with the rest of the band, you know, and the manager, who was a guy called Joe Smith. So he got back to me, and he seen me in the schoolyard a few days later and said, you know, yeah, that's no problem. If you want to come bring your drums down, or bring your snare drum and get the guys to bring their guitars, and you can use our amps, and you know, bring your snare drum and your foot pedal, your bass drum foot pedal, and you can use our drummer's drums. So that's what we did, and that's really my first contact with Phil, really. Even though I knew him in school only to see, I didn't know him personally.
Yeah.
And we played support of the Black Eagles for a couple of months maybe. And at the end of that situation, we didn't really know. We no gigs really. You know, there was beat clubs in Dublin, but we were a bit young to play in those. So, but a stroke of luck happened around that time as well. Phil approached me one day in the schoolyard and said to me, you know, our drummer's leaving the Black Eagles, and there's going to be an opening for a drummer, you know. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good, you know. I'll come down. Where do I go? And he said, no, you have to apply for it. We're going to put an ad in the Evening Herald, which was a local Dublin paper, and I think it still is.
Yeah.
He said, you need to answer the ad. There's other drummers obviously going to be auditioned as well that day. So I said, okay, you know. So I saw the ad in the paper. I obviously applied and, you know, sent off the application on the ad, you know. And a couple of days later, I got a reply, and it was a box number. I had to go back into the Irish Press office, or the Irish Independent office, and pick up the answer in the box. And it was come down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something on a Saturday. And my dad drove me there. You know, it was in a place called Leglin Road in Crumlin. I was living in Cashel at the time, you know, and it was only about a 5-minute drive. But I needed to put the drums in there. My dad drove me down. And when I got there, I realised I didn't need to bring the drums, because there was the ex-drummer's drum kit was there all the time, you know. He just left the drums there. But and I used them for the audition. I just used my snare drum, but I used the drummer's, a guy called Mick Higgins used to play with him. I used Mick's drums, you know, and there was other drummers there. One guy I actually knew, a guy called Barry Williams. He was at that audition as well, and I kind of knew him he was in my class the year before, and I kind of knew him, so that kind of set in my mind a bit. I kind of knew I was slightly better than him, you know. And I think Barry knew that as
slightly
well,
better than everybody, I would say.
Yeah, you know, I mean, but there's another couple of drummers who I didn't know, and they were before me. You know, I was the last to be auditioned. There was 4 drummers there who obviously answered the ad as well. You know, 4 or 5 drummers, in fact, and they all did the audition. I was sitting downstairs in the house. This was the back bedroom up in Joe Smith's house,
Brilliant.
And I could hear everybody, you know, and I'm saying, you know, that sounds pretty good. That guy might get it, you know. I'm up against it now, and I was pretty nervous when I got into the bedroom, sit down behind the kid, and put my snare drum up. I was pretty nervous. But Phil went over and said, "Oh man, how's it going?" And I said, "How you keeping, Phil?" And he said, "Best of luck. You know, we're going to do a couple of numbers, and I'm sure you know what the procedure is. I'm sure you heard it." I said, "Yeah." So we started off, and I think we did a Beatles song. Right. I'm not exactly sure what song it was, but I kind of knew it. And we started that, and I did that, and we did another couple of numbers. And the last number we did was the Kinks' "You Really Got Me," and I kind of knew that like the back of my hand. So I was kind of confident after those three numbers. You know, after hearing the other guys in the audition, Barry Williams sounded pretty good as well. You know, so I was up against it. But Phil said to me, he says, "Well, we'll get back to you in a few days. You know, I'm sure I'll see you in the schoolyard." I said, "Yeah, brilliant. You know, that's fine." He said, "By the way, you sounded the best of the whole lot." He just said that privately to me, out of earshot from the rest of the Black Eagles. You know, so that, you know, that I sounded. You know, obviously I was pretty confident then. You know, so he seen me in the schoolyard about 3 or 4 days later. Came up to me and said, what you think? What do you reckon?" He says, "Yeah, we had a discussion about it, you know, and we've all come to the conclusion that you were the best guy on the night, you know, on the day, you know, and you have the gig." I was over the moon, you know.
Absolutely.
I think I even hugged Phil.
You know, reminds me of, Brian, the story about Ron Tutt when he went to him and his wife and the kid, you know, got in the car and drove out to Las Vegas to audition for Elvis. And he was the last drummer, and the rest of them were all famous session drummers. Even one of the big band drummers, Shelley Main, maybe I think might have been. Yeah, and the last drummer was Ron Tutt, and the rest of the band were like, you know, he's already picked the best drummer. He picked Ron Tutt, and I think the reason that he picked him, and you might be able to shed light on this, was he knew how to play along to Elvis's energy and his singing and timing, which is so important for a singer. I think
he had a good feel, more or less.
Yeah, and that's
he had a better feel than the other guys, maybe. Because Shelley Mann is a jazz drummer. He's a great drummer.
Yeah, I agree.
He's more jazz than rock and roll, although he could play rock and roll, you know. But I think Tut got it because he had more feel for rock and roll, which was like Elvis had a feel for it, where, you know, jazz drummers just play from even the sheet music, you know. You never know. There's no real heart in it. But I'm sure that's why Ronnie, what's his name? Ronnie Tutt?
Ronnie Tutt, yeah, brilliant drummer.
Ronnie Tutt, I'm sure that's why he got the gig. Elvis knew he had a feel for his music, you know. Ronnie Tutt had a feel for it.
And
so that's why he got the gig.
When you're playing along, you can, like, the drumming that's going on in there between singer and drummer, that's simpatico right there. It's just right in together.
Yeah, you do. You get into that pocket, you know. When Phil came up with the idea of that riff was knocking around for a while. You know, I kind of had an idea that it could have been one of our heavier songs that we ever played, even with the Eric Bell era gone and the Gary Moore stint when he was in the band for a few months. I kind of knew when Shalala was introduced into the band that this could be one of our heavier songs, and I suggested maybe we stick a drum solo in there to even make it more heavier. That's when Lizzy started to become really heavy, when the guys, you know, Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham joined. That was one of the first indicators that we could end up as a pretty heavy band, you know. Even though it was on an album that was kind of lightweight, which was Nightlife, you know. It was a great album, but it was kind of lightweight. And Shalala was kind of a standout track because it was so heavy on the album, you know. Yeah. But you kind of guess when you play that kind of stuff that this band, you know, that Lizzy could go on in a few directions. You know, we could go soft rock, medium rock, or hard rock, like with the Shalala thing. And we did eventually go off on that tangent, hard rock tangent, rather than the softer versions that we were playing, you know, softer versions of the band.
But weren't you always still had that melodic songwriting with Phil, obviously, in his great songwriting, but also that you'd a very light touch for a heavy drummer. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think that I acquired that because of Phil's songwriting. Phil was an amazing songwriter, don't get me wrong, but he come up with really heavy, well, a good rocker 1 minute, and the next minute you come up with a ballad. So you're sitting there going, oh my God, what's going on here, So 1 minute you're playing like the rocker, and the next minute you're playing Frankie Carroll, you're going, I have to change my style for this. So your style was changing every second song that Phil would write, because he was so talented and so versatile that he'd come up with all sorts of different melodies with different feels and different energy. As I said, like 1 minute it'd be the rocker, the next minute it'd be Frankie Carroll, the next minute it'd be like Philomena, which is another kind of a hard rock tune with an Irish kind of lilt to it. So you'd need to keep your chops in order. You need to know exactly what Phil required. Without asking him too much about it. So I knew I was versatile enough. I'd played in a couple of bands before that, like obviously the Mod Concave Dwellers, the Liffey Beats, but I also did stints with like the Burma Boys show band, and they taught me. I was only in that band for about 4 months, but they taught me how to be versatile, how to listen on the radio to everything, not pass over anything, listen to everything that came out, like waltzes, foxtrots, rock and roll, jiving stuff. So I was kind of steeped in that way of listening,
Yeah.
You'd listen to everything that came on radio years ago, and then you turn on Radio Luxembourg, which was the only pop station you could pick up in Ireland.
Yeah.
Back then. It was kind of fading in and out. It wasn't consistent sound. 1 minute it'd be good sound, and next minute it'd fade out because of the airwaves wasn't great. It was on medium wave. But you become versatile pretty quickly by doing that.
But Brian, speaking of
Phil was
versatile,
obviously in the same boat as the rest of us in Ireland back then, listening to everything and anything that came on the radio, just in case you'd be called up by a show band to play this stuff.
Yeah.
And that was my motto, just listen to everything. Try to become accustomed to all sorts of music that was going around, country and western and all that was happening in Ireland back then. Country and Irish used to call it. So we were steeped in that kind of way of listening, and Phil was the same, and so I was kind of aware that he was versatile, not thinking that he was going to become famous eventually for being that way, and that's the way Lizzy was all the way through Lizzy. We were versatile. Phil would come up with a rocker 1 minute, the next minute it'd be a ballad, the next minute it'd be a soft rock number, the next minute it'd be a really slow kind of Irish air, like air, or the Aging Orphans or something like that. So you need to keep your wits about you, and that's exactly what I did.
Yeah.
You'd have to be aware of Phil's various feels in the songs, and I was,
Like Black Rose, and Black Rose is an incredible drum pattern, and also then you got something like Fats. I love Fats. That's like
Fats is a great song. I mean, that's another case of two completely. I mean, Black Rose and Fats are totally different songs, like chalk and cheese. But you'd have to know how these tempos worked and how the tempos has to be interpreted. I mean, Black Rose is just a 12/8 feel. It's like a blues feel, but it's a 12/8 kind of thing going. With an Irish air behind it. And that's how that went. But, I just think we were, the band, Lizzy from the very start, was always open to all sorts of different feels, being very versatile and keep your mind open. And that's how Lizzy started, and I think that's, nowadays, we've been given more credit for that now. Back in the day, we weren't given much credit for that. In fact, a lot of reviews we got were detrimental to the band because of that. We didn't have a really a direction we were going in that people could latch onto. We were very diverse. We had all sorts of different styles on our albums in the early days, and even in the stuff that we played with Robbo, not so much with Robbo and Scott, but definitely with Eric Bell. And when Gary was in for a few months back in the early days, the band was very diverse. Played all sorts of different sorts of music, even though it was basically rock and roll. But we had a reputation for being maybe too versatile. For that period. We should have maybe stuck to just out and out rock and roll. we might have got, become more popular by doing that. But there again, like listening back to those songs now, it's a perfect combination of rock, ballads, and soft rock numbers, and that's what we've become famous for, I suppose, over the years,
And longevity, I think, if you had just stuck to one style, Brian, like Bowie never stuck to one style, Queen never. The greatest bands, the greatest artists, they're versatile, and that's what makes them. And in the long run, like I was going to say to you, the longevity of Lizzy and the generational reach. I mean, there's still kids every year. There's new kids, 12, 13, 14, coming up, becoming Lizzy fans, wearing the Lizzy T-shirt, growing their hair long. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is incredible after all these years. I never thought, or nobody in the band ever thought when we started. I'm sure Eric Bell didn't know this, but 35, 40 years later, you're going to have new fans, new kids coming up, and as you say, playing Lizzy stuff and growing their hair long and wearing Thin Lizzy T-shirts and all that. 35 years after Phil died, it's just amazing to know that. And we become this kind of an iconic. Very influential band on lots of bands over the years, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, and all those kind of bands. Have been obviously very influenced by Lizzy, which is brilliant to know. And I know Metallica did a version of Whiskey in the Jar, which sounds pretty good to me. It's kind of a note for no version of our version of it, but they put their own stamp on it. It sounds much heavier, but it's basically the version we did in the studio in Decca Studios all those years ago, and it's great to see that, and to hear that. Yeah, it's just brilliant, and
Brian,
to know that.
I'm from Crumlin, right?
I didn't know that, Derek.
Yeah, I'm from Kildare Road, like a stone's throw from Philip's house. But I remember one year I was looking out my bedroom, 1982. I was looking out my bedroom window when you and Phil got out of a car. Like it looked like a black limousine, but it was probably a Mercedes. And you just got out just on Kildare Road. You'd maybe going around the Floods for a pint or something. And I remember going, oh my God, look, it's Lizzy, it's Phil Lynott. Because I thought he was super cool. Who didn't, And I had bought the single together, and I was running around trying to find a pen. And when I finally found the pen, you were gone. I was sickened.
Weird.
But I wonder what you were doing in 1982 in Crumlin. I mean, you would have came back a lot, obviously.
Well, Floods was definitely a place we go in for a pint. There's no doubt about that. But I used to stay in my dad's house up Cashel Avenue, when I come back. I try to avoid a hotel and all that sort of stuff and just stay in the house, And that year was, 1982, did you say?
Yeah, 82. I was 14, yeah.
82 would have been near, yeah. Well, that would have been the year, obviously, we'd come back and have a few pints and Floods and meet up with my dad and the Black Horse in Crumlin, and maybe have another few pints there. So we do the rounds, we go into the locals first and then maybe end up in the Bailey or in Brussels or somewhere in town later that night, I sound like a right alcoholic here saying that. But there you go, that's what we used to do.
You wouldn't be getting the bus home though, would you?
Phil had come up to my dad's house in Cashel, and we'd end up in Floods or in the Black Horse or in the Come On Inn in Kimmage Road there, and then head off into town later that evening. And that's when we had time off in Dublin. Mainly we'd come back to play, but sometimes we'd just come back for 4 or 5 days to chill, and just to have a few pints in the Black Horse and Floods. That's what we did. But we get the limo. Gus Curtis would drive us in the limo up to Phil's house or up to my house in Cashel, and that limo would be on call all day basically. For travelling around Dublin. So we'd end up in all sorts of places in Dublin in the limo. And showing off obviously.
As you should, and as you deserve.
Sure,
you said about
meet people in the Bailey and go back to somebody's party in the limo, out in Sandymount or wherever, So back in those days, it was just amazing the amount of stuff that was happening in Dublin. So you'd end up in all sorts of places, and Phil would be there at the last minute, 6 o'clock in the morning, we'd be going home, But that's the way we were back then. Yeah. And Eric Bell was the same when he went to Belfast. He was telling me, he'd end up with his relations in the local, and he'd be on the pub crawl because on the road for nearly 8, 9, 10 months of the year, and have a couple of weeks off, Christmas time or in the summer sometime. That's what you do. Back then.
Yeah.
Eric was in the same boat. Gary Moore exactly the same as well. So it was great to get back to Ireland because. It was great. London was brilliant. Don't get me wrong. England was fantastic to play and live in. But to get back to Ireland every so often was just so special. Meet up with your old friends, and then when we got the hit with Whiskey in the Jar, it was even more special.
Yeah.
Meeting people and people inviting you up to play jam sessions in the Bagot Inn or places like that. We could go out to see Brush Shields. He'd invite us up. And we could up and jam half the night with Brush, and that was amazing, brilliant days in the Bagot Inn or in some other club somewhere, So, that's what we'd look forward to. And Dublin was full of clubs and full of pubs with bands playing, so you weren't spoiled for choice. There was loads of places you could play, or you were spoiled for choice. There was so many places. It's completely changed now. There's very few places left like that.
Do you remember? Of course, you remember Mama's Boys, but I always thought that Tommy was a great drummer.
A brilliant drummer, yeah. Poor Tommy, he died there a good few years ago from leukemia. But Tommy was an amazing drummer. Great band. They actually supported us on one of our tours, and Pat McManus. I actually played with Pat McManus only last year. We did with my band now, Brian Downey's Live and Dangerous. We played some gigs in France, and the lads are on the same show, So Pat got up and played Whiskey in the Jar with us on his fiddle, just as a jam. It was just amazing and just brilliant. Yeah. And I know Pat's going back to the early '80s, when he played with Mama's Boys on tour with us. And I found the band absolutely amazing for openers. They were just brilliant opening band. And I was surprised they never really made it. They kind of did make it, but not as big as I expected them to be. I just thought they were an amazing three-piece band. Reminded me of Thin Lizzy in some ways.
Yeah.
Had that kind of energy with that brilliant musicianship they had. They were great players.
Well, he had that swing.
Pat McManus is still a great player. He still plays great,
He is.
with his own band now. But no, it was really sad when Tommy died. I was really, really devastated.
Yeah.
When I heard about Tommy dying.
I was.
Sadly missed,
I hung around with him for a short time in Dublin for about a year or so. I met him on South Sector Road where I lived there, and we just became friends. He used to play snooker.
Yeah.
And he went on tour, then came back, and he was sick again, and then I heard the news. But he had that same thing that you have, that all the best drummers have to have. Ringo Starr had it. You could swing. Duke Ellington says it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And I really believe if a drummer can't swing, forget it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's kind of one of those things that you kind of acquire over the years. And when I started drumming, I didn't really know what swing meant. I heard the jazz and all that, but I'd know a conception of what swing really meant until I got much further into my early career, and I started. I was very lucky in the Black Eagles. We had a guitar player called Alan Sinclair. He was from Inchicore, and I knew Alan maybe a year before I joined the Black Eagles. And it's really funny that Alan actually ended up in the Black Eagles like me. He wasn't the original guitar player, but he came in after our original guitar player left. And it just so happened to be Alan Sinclair, who I knew. And Alan gave me a loan of an album called Barney Kessel Plays Standards. And Barney Kessel was a great jazz guitar player from America, Yeah. And these standards were like Foggy Day in London Town, all those kind of jazz songs, and Shelley, talking about Shelley Mann, we were just talking about him earlier. He was a drummer on that album, and I really studied Shelley Mann's playing on jazz. I really couldn't grasp it, It was a bit above my intellectual intelligence at that stage, musical intelligence at that stage, and I really found it difficult to follow him because I wasn't a regular 2-4 beat. Jazz was. Yeah. The beats were all over the place, and I really couldn't. But I grasped it after a while, after about a good maybe 10 listens. of the album, I grasped it, and I heard that swing. I was fascinated to know where this swing came from. So as time went on, maybe a year later, I heard some blues songs. And Alan Sinclair was another instigator. He said to me, have a listen to the Yardbirds. He turned me on to the Yardbirds in the early days. And I got the 5 Live Yardbirds that played in the Marquee Club in London. And there was a bit of kind of swinging blues on that. So I said to myself, Jesus, this is where the swing comes from. This is where Shelly Manne got this stuff. He must have got it from blues in America. And obviously, that's where the kind of jazz came from. Blues, early Dixieland and all that, but it all basically came from the blues source.
Yeah.
And which I didn't really know too well at the time. But I have to credit Alan Sinclair for turning me on to Barney Kessel and the Yardbirds back then. And I started practicing then big time and trying to acquire that shuffle beat, that swing.
Yeah, yeah.
And
you did.
I eventually, I seemed to break through when I joined a band called the Sugar Shack, who were purely a blues band. Make no mistake about it. We played all sorts of blues stuff, and that's when the shuffle, this swing, really came into my kind of repertoire. I really started concentrating on it. But no, I needed to. I didn't come naturally by any means. I'm sure Ringo and all those swing drummers had that same problem. It takes time. It takes a bit of practice, and definitely playing with bands helps. The Sugar Shack certainly helped my technique. By playing all sorts of blues. But swing was behind. That swing beat was behind most of those songs back then. And that's how that came about.
Yeah.
And just continued into Thin Lizzy. I mean, the boys are back in town. Has got lots of swing.
Oh yeah.
Really does. Don't believe a word.
Yeah.
Do anything you want to. All those in Chinatown, obviously. All those have got that swing shuffle.
Yeah.
So, but it basically came from being turned on to jazz and blues early on in your career.
Yeah.
And I have to credit Alan Sinclair with that. But it's a weird story, that, because Alan came in after me into the Black Eagles. I was in the band maybe about 6 months when Alan turned up for the audition for the guitar player, because the guitar player decided to leave the band for some reason. I actually can't remember why he left. A guy called Huey Fury was his name. He decided to leave, and Alan applied for the audition. And when I seen Alan at the audition, I nearly freaked. And I said to Phil, I know this guy. And Phil said, how do you know him? I said, I played in his house only, a year ago, when I applied. Another case of answering an ad in the paper. Alan Sinclair put the ad in, looking for a drummer to form a band. And I went down, I cycled down to Inchicore with a snare drum, sticks in the snare drum on the on the cycle, on the bicycle. And when I got to his house, I was the only musician there, him and me. But he had a lovely Gibson 335, I remember, which is very unusual back in Dublin back then. It was so expensive. And that really impressed me when I seen the Gibson. And he said to me, there's nobody else here. Nobody else applied for the gig, to form a band. You're the only guy. And I said, well, that's weird. I said, do you think I should put another ad in? And he did. He put another ad in, but we couldn't get a bass player. So we kind of parted company after. I still kept him in contact with him, even though I had no phone. I knew where he drank in Inchicore, and I'd go down there every so often and meet him in the pub, and have a drink with him. And but he'd no luck getting a bass player and a singer. But it was really weird. Now 6 months later, he turns up for the audition for the Black Eagles, not knowing that I'm playing drums in the Black Eagles. He didn't know that. It was very unusual.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question, Brian, that we always ask our guests. You've been in America many, many times. You've toured here so many times. We always ask our guests, what is America to you? Did you have a certain love for this country, or could you give what you feel America means to you?
Oh, well, yeah, America. I mean, when you're living in Ireland back then, America was the land of milk and honey, basically, because I had relations living in America, the Corbettys, and they were living in Boston. And every so often, in fact, was only twice they came back to Ireland, and I was kind of young when I met them. I was only about 7, maybe 7 or 8. But I met them when they were in Dublin. They came up to visit our house in Crumlin, and the American accent just completely fascinated me. But not only that, they had some amazing stories about America, and they were very, very confident about telling these stories, which was even more fascinating. And I was listening to all sorts of stories about, the Corby's married into the a family of I can't remember the name now. But anyway, the family they married into were all Irish cops in Boston, and the stories they were telling me about the cops patrolling the streets of Boston with all the Irish there was just so funny and fascinating at the same time, and that had a lasting impression on me, knowing that Boston was a kind of an Irish city in some respects, with all the police and all the immigrants that lived there. And I was fascinated by that for years, and until eventually we got to play in Boston, and I realised how Irish Boston was, Irish influence and that. But don't forget as well that Ireland back then had films like cowboy movies coming in, The Lone Ranger, Hopalong Cassidy, and they were kind of you could go down to your local cinema, and they were kind of matinees where you'd see, and they were called follow-uppers. So you see one part of the movie one week, and you'd have to go back the next week to see the rest of it, and the week after to see the end of it. So you'd have 3 weeks where it was called a follow-uppers they were called. And cowboy movies had a massive impression on me, The Lone Ranger, Hopalong Cassidy, Jesse James, all those kind of, and it had a big influence on Phil because he wrote the cowboy song, don't forget. All influenced by America, and when we got to America, it was just totally eye-opening, we just couldn't believe how fantastic the place was compared to parts of the UK, Ireland and Europe even, America was so fresh and vibrant, and music was still amazingly brilliant. You could go and we were in Chicago. We went down to Rush Street to see all the blues clubs, and ended up in Ratzo's, I think it was called, where Gary Moore and Rory used to go down to jam in later days. But we were there in the early days, and there was still an amazing blues scene in Chicago back then. And in fact, one club we walked into, I think I was the only white guy in the club. I went in with Phil.
There's a change. There's a change.
This is it. But it was a brilliant session. Phil got up and jammed. They knew who Phil was from the boys back in town and all that. And we were invited up to jam, and we jammed with some brilliant blues guys. It was just an incredible feeling. But America has just a lasting impression in my mind. Has been a very vibrant, open society, with incredible music and musicians, and that's the way I pictured it before I went, and it lived up to all my expectations.
Brilliant, Brett. That's a great insight. Well, listen, Brian, we really can't thank you enough for coming onto our show. Me and Jessica, I have a feeling that you got into some subjects and conversation you maybe never got into before. At least I'd like to think that. Yeah. But
it just made to wreck my brain. It was so long ago, far away. But no, I think we covered most of it there from the early days anyway.
Yeah, Brian, I can't thank you enough, and it's great. I hope when I get back to Dublin and all this craziness is over, I'll meet you. Maybe go around. I don't drink, but we go around and have a cup of coffee in Floods.
Well, I don't drink either now, but I would definitely go for a coffee. All right, definitely.
Great.
Have a coffee and Floods. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Brian. Thanks a bazillion. I can't thank you enough. An absolute honour to have you on.
Thanks very much, Derek.
Brian, have a great day. Enjoy your walk today.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, Derek.
Bye, Brian.
All the best. Bye.
Okay, that was Brian Downey, and no doubt one of the greatest drummers in the world. And it was great to hear him go into detail about his influences, talking about Shelly Manne, and I've always wanted to know where Brian Downey got a swing from. We know. Yeah. And I said it took him a couple of listens to that Barney Kessel album, and it's funny I mentioned Shelly Man earlier on, and that was the drummer that got him into jazz. He would not, that band wouldn't be as brilliant without his swing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. But all those, to me, that was a little nostalgic because he's talking about all the places in Dublin that I knew. Later than Brian, but still I knew them. And I played in a band that did all their songs. That's how I met Brian. What a nice guy.
I felt like I got a history tour of Ireland.
You really, that was like, what do they call that? Almost like a, there's a name for that tour that you do around the country.
The rock and roll history.
The rock and roll history tour. And I know you're a big rocker. The rocker. Anyway, once again, thank you, Brian Downey, my fellow Crumlin man. Castle Road. I rocked that road many times. Probably fancied a few girls there too, but that's a different story. Okay, so thanks again. Don't forget to subscribe. I can't even say that word. Give us some likes and continue the comments. So for now, thank you from us, myself and Jessica. What is America to you? Goodbye for now.
Driving along, minding my own business, heading east through the Kentucky rain. There on the radio, Johnny Cash was singing. I hurt myself just to see if I still feel pain.